Next on Currents News, the future in your hands. Election day is tomorrow, and after a lot of rhetoric and a lot of money, the citizens will decide the outcome. Special coverage is next. An important day for the Catholic Church. Men from the Brooklyn Diocese and elsewhere taking a big step on the path to priesthood. The leading elements of that migrant caravan are entering Mexico City. Thousands more are headed that way, and a possible confrontation with U.S. troops at the border. Plus, Pope Francis is taking on anti-Semitism at a meeting with rabbis at the Vatican. The news starts right now. Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Faublas. In a little more than 10 hours, the polls will open after a furious campaign, and the people will decide the outcome of the midterm elections. Interest is sky high. Early voting has set records in many places. Karen Kafa kicks off our special coverage.
President Trump taking on the midterms with a final blitz of 11 rallies in 6 days.
This is one of the most important elections of our entire lives.
The president seizing on immigration fears in the final days to motivate voters in border states like Arizona, Nevada, and Texas, and hitting states that went his way in 2016, Missouri, West Virginia, Indiana, and Tennessee, all crucial to control of the U.S. Senate. With 35 seats on the ballot, Democrats need a net gain of 2, a goal that became more politically complex after the Supreme Court confirmation battle over Brett Kavanaugh energized Republicans.
This is an opportunity, I think, to have a long-term impact on the country.
But Republicans also face the headwinds that come with a president with approval ratings below 50% and whose incendiary rhetoric may alienate moderates, women, and independents.
Healthcare is on the ballot. You vote, you might save a life.
Democrats see an opportunity with a message of protecting healthcare and entitlement programs in Republican crosshairs.
We need to fix it. We need to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, not dismantle it. And that's what our new leaders will do.
Suburban districts will be key to whether they make the net gain of 23 seats needed to flip the House. That's where Republicans will lean on their record, highlighting low unemployment and the economy. In Washington, Karen Kafa, Currents News.
In New York, voters are also choosing state office holders, including the governor and members of the state Senate and Assembly. New Jersey's most watched race pits Bob Menendez against challenger Bob Eugen for the U.S. Senate. The polls in New York will be open tomorrow from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. and in New Jersey from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. The New York State Catholic Conference is confirming to Currents News a report that after the elections, the group would be willing to talk about the statute of limitations on clerical sex abuse claims. Dennis Paus, a conference spokesman, said no matter who ends up controlling state Senate, quote, "We would welcome discussions to resolve this issue in a way that is acceptable to survivors first, but also to religious and nonprofit organizations who would be impacted. The church in Brooklyn, New York, and Rockville Center already created reconciliation and compensation programs for abuse survivors." The leading elements of that migrant caravan have reached Mexico City. Their march to the United States has been a hot-button topic throughout this election. President Trump has vowed to stop them at the border and deployed U.S. troops to guard the crossing. We're going to have a lot more about the midterm elections. Monsignor Kieran Harrington will join us to talk about getting to the polls and what issues matter most to Catholics. That's all still ahead. Turning now to major news involving the priesthood. Men from the Brooklyn Diocese and other places near and far have taken a big step on the path to holy orders. Currents News' Katie Engesser reports.
For 13 men, this is more than an ordinary mass.
I got emotional from the very beginning.
That's because these seminarians are taking a big step in their lives. They're being ordained transitional deacons, and in about 6 months, if all goes well, they will become priests.
This is something I've been dreaming all my lifetimes.
Laying prostrate on the floor of St. Joseph's Seminary in Yonkers, they pray to the saints for guidance in their new roles. The 13 men include 8 from the New York Archdiocese and the Diocese of Rockville Center, 2 from South Korea's Diocese of Daejeon, and 3 from the Diocese of Brooklyn. They all come from different backgrounds, but each has been waiting for this Saturday.
Watching so many other years of friends of mine now that are priests and watching them do it and now to do the same thing, that definitely hit me.
Actually, I've never imagined to come to the United States or spending my life in other countries, but so it's very great. I mean,
it's a very powerful day. It's a culmination and a beginning.
Bishop John Barris, Rockville Center's Catholic leader, presides over the liturgy. By laying on his hands, he invokes the Holy Spirit on the young men, allowing them to celebrate sacraments such as baptisms and marriages.
Really, I'm just looking forward to being part of a new community.
And the deacons get started right away.
That was baptized there.
After Mass, each deacon is given a letter telling them where they will serve before priesthood. The men of the Brooklyn Diocese see their new assignments as great opportunities.
I was very blessed to be with the parish of Mary Queen of Heaven, which where I'll be going now as a deacon. I was there last summer. People were great, and I'm really looking forward to going back.
But that is Sacred Heart of Jesus and Mary and St. Stephen in Carol's Garden. So yes, I've not really been to the parish. Yeah. So it's a good thing that probably I'm going to experience a new environment.
So I'm going to St. Fidelis in College Point, and Monsignor Heron is the pastor, which is pretty funny because he was the pastor of my home parish when I was a little kid.
Bishop Barris says the deacons will do more than just serve. They will help build the future church in a time of testing for Catholics, coping with the clerical sex abuse crisis.
These young men are stepping up at a really challenging time of church history. The fact that they're following the power of the Holy Spirit is such a great moment for our church and such a sign of hope.
And these soon-to-be priests are looking forward to fulfilling that hope and meeting the challenges ahead. In Yonkers, Katie Anguser, Currents News.
President Trump is taking action that's reverberating around the world. He's slapping sanctions back onto the Islamic Republic of Iran starting today. Omar Jimenez reports the latest.
The United States is now reimposing all sanctions on Iran lifted by the 2015 nuclear deal.
The Iranian regime has a choice. It can either do a 180-degree turn from its outlaw course of action and act like a normal country, or it can see its economy crumble.
These sanctions are now the second round of reimposed penalties since President Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal in May.
Today we sanctioned more than 700 individuals, entities, aircraft, and vessels as part of Treasury's largest ever single-day action targeting Iran.
It's a day that's been a long time coming for the Trump administration ever since it pulled out of the nuclear deal. Even President Trump tweeted out a Game of Thrones-style image of himself on Friday saying sanctions are coming. And now that November 5th is here, there's been swift reaction around the world. For starters, in Iran, President Hassan Rouhani isn't planning to play along.
We will break the sanctions with honor because sanctions are cruel, are against the international law, are against agreements, are against UN resolutions.
After the 2015 nuclear deal went into effect, the United States' own State Department certified several times that Iran was sticking to its end of the deal. And it's a deal that many countries still support, including France, Germany, the UK, Russia, and China. All of them largely disagree with the U.S.'s latest decision. In Washington, Omar Jimenez, Currents News.
Getting Asia Bibi out of Pakistan is getting complicated after the Christian woman escaped a hangman's noose. Her death sentence for blasphemy was overturned by the Supreme Court. Violent protests erupted in the Muslim country after the decision was made. To quiet the mobs, according to the BBC, the government said there'll be court proceedings to bar Bibi from leaving the country. Historic rainfall and flooding that swamped Italy's record books has claimed the lives of at least 29 people. The latest victims dying this weekend. Italy's prime minister is declaring states of emergency in many parts of the country. There's a lot more news headed your way. Pope Francis met today with rabbis at the Vatican days after the Pittsburgh synagogue massacre.
Students at One Brooklyn Catholic Academy raise money and collect hats for a good cause. I'm Tim Harfman, and I'll have the story.
The midterm elections are in the final countdown, and before voters decide, Monsignor Kieran Harrington joins us to dig deep into the important issues that matter to Catholics. And an important programming note to share with you. Currents News will be moving to new time slots. Starting Monday, December 3rd, the news will air a half hour earlier at 7 p.m. right here on NET. Reruns will air at 10 p.m. and then the next morning again at 7:30 a.m. Mark those calendars. We'll be right back. There are a lot of critical issues that will be decided at the polls tomorrow, not only control of Congress, but also what direction will be taken on topics like immigration. Getting out the vote is vital. Joining us to explore why going to the polls is so important, especially for Catholics, is Monsignor Kieran Harrington, the Brooklyn Diocese Vicar for Communications. Monsignor, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be with you, Liz.
We have so much to cover, so I want to begin with this. In a statement released by the USCCB, they highlight the values of forming consciences for faithful as first helping them to do so. Secondly, to teach those entrusted in care of pastors, lay, and religious faithful, all people of goodwill, they say, to contribute to civil and respectful public dialogue. And finally, to shape political choices in the coming election in light of Catholic teachings. I want to begin with you by asking, what is faithful citizenship?
Yeah, the important component for being a citizen of any country is participating in the democracy. Okay. And so the question becomes, how do we as Catholics, guided by the teachings of Christ and formed by the gospel, formed by the catechism of the Catholic Church, make application from principles to electing people who are going to represent us in government?
Monsignor, Catholics are urged to vote their conscience with regard to the main issues affecting people of faith. What are those issues, and what exactly does it mean to vote your conscience?
Well, first off, so when we think about voting, you're voting on a lot of different levels, right? In this election, you're going to be voting for a governor, an attorney general, and for a state comptroller, as well as state senators and state assembly people. You're also going to be voting for your congressional member. You're going to be voting for a senator. You're going to be voting for, so there's the votes that are taking place at the federal level and at the state level. You're going to try to apply and say, okay, as a Catholic, what are the primary issues that we're faced with at a state? For instance, with Governor Cuomo, one may ask the question about his position on abortion and say, is there a radical agenda on abortion in New York State? You may make a different calculation when you're voting for a member of the House of Representatives. Maybe you're going to say there, I'm concerned about the question about, because the real matter that they're taking up would be immigration questions. And so I'm going to be concerned about, what does my House member think about immigration questions? In terms of the Senate, you may say, well, okay, I'm voting for somebody who's going to make the decision about the next Supreme Court justice. Who's that person?
Right.
So not all politicians are the same, and how we bring the various issues to bear on these elections is going to matter as well.
So to clarify, what the USCCB does, what our priests do and what our prelates do, is to guide the Catholic consciousness, is to make them ask the important questions, which brings me to this question. When priests speak about politics, many question if the act of informing the faithful about their civic duty comes dangerously close to violating that philosophy of separation between church and state. How do you respond to that?
Well, first off, there's nothing wrong with telling people you have to go out and vote.
Okay.
Tomorrow is election day and you have to go out and vote. There's also nothing wrong, and we'd have to question this, if we were in a country which was pursuing policies which were an affront to human dignity, for instance, slavery. Of course, you would want your elected officials to say, this is an evil and we cannot abide by this evil.
Sure.
So religion does come to bear on matters of public policy. The challenge we face is that who really represents us best? Politicians are very adroit at playing to different bases, and so therefore there's really not a Catholic politician. And so we have to kind of try to discern, how is it that we can choose the person who's going to make the best decision, and who's the person who will make the best decisions on a whole host of issues.
A key word there, Monsignor. Thank you, discernment. Pope Francis said, quote, Good Catholics immerse themselves in politics by offering the best of themselves so that the leader can govern. In what ways can Catholics, not only here in the Brooklyn Diocese, but throughout our nation, immerse themselves in politics, especially during this very key election?
Yeah, so we talked about voting, and that's a baseline, right? That's the minimum responsibility that I have. But then beyond voting, I have an obligation to be in touch with my elected officials on matters of importance to us. And so this is something where a lot of Catholics kind of fail. We don't speak about matters that are important to us. We feel that on election day, November, we vote once and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
The truth of the matter is elections take place in New York, at least in September, when we have a primary election. They take place in November. And then it's the continual engagement with our civic officials on matters that are important. Now, key question is that we think about sometimes matters which are really up to discretion, right? That you may think about some matters that that a person can take different positions on. As Catholics,
Sure.
We're guided by a principle. This would be immigration. Immigration would be a matter where prudential judgment would come into play to say, what are the best policies that would involve with immigration? Then there are other matters, for instance, like on human life, the dignity of human life, where there isn't that same discretion. That to pursue a policy that would take a human life or the funding of taking of human lives, that policy, that can never be justified. So as Catholics, we're trying to weigh all these different matters when we're going to vote on election, but also when we're involved in advocacy every day.
Monsignor Harrington, very important perspective and insight there. Thank you so much for being with us today. Tomorrow's a big day. Pope Francis is condemning a terrorist attack that took the lives of 7 Coptic Christians in Egypt.
Prego per le vittime, pellegrini uccisi per il solo fatto di essere cristiani, e chiedo a Maria Santissima di consolare le famiglie e l'intera comunità.
Christians in Egypt have suffered many attacks after this one. Friday, Cairo claimed 19 terrorists were tracked down and killed. A bus carrying the Copts were fired upon as it made pilgrimage to the St. Samuel the Confessor Monastery in Manaya. Islamic State claimed responsibility for that attack. The Holy Father is also taking on anti-Semitism within days of the worst massacre of Jews in U.S. history. He met this morning with a group of international rabbis, and Melissa Butts is standing by at the Vatican with that.
A little bit more than a week after 11 people died at an October 27th shooting at a Pittsburgh synagogue, Pope Francis met with a Jewish delegation dating back to the 5th century. Pope Francis held this meeting with a group of rabbis from the Caucasus belonging to the World Congress of Mountain Jews.
Allow us to express our gratitude for receiving the delegation of the World Congress of Mountain Jews, the Vatican.
It's the first time Jews from that area and tradition have visited a pope. Pope Francis stressed the importance of remembering the Holocaust so that its memory remains alive. He also recalled that attacking places of worship or the people belonging to a religion is trying to eradicate the presence of the Creator from the heart of the people.
Quando si è voluto sostituire il buon Dio con l'idolatria del potere e l'ideologia dell'odio, si è arrivati alla follia di sterminare le creature. Perciò la libertà religiosa è un bene sommo da tutelare, un diritto umano fondamentale, baluardo contro le pretese totalitariste.
The Pope lamented that anti-Semitic attitudes from the past continue to be reproduced, especially amongst Christians.
Come più volte ho ricordato, un cristiano non può essere antisemita. Le nostre radici sono comuni. Sarebbe una contraddizione della fede e della vita. Insieme siamo invece chiamati a impegnarci perché l'antisemitismo sia bandito dalla comunità umana.
Finally, Pope Francis invited them to work to promote and expand the dialogue between Jews and Christians. He said it was especially important in these times and for the good of all humanity.
Dell'amicizia tra ebrei e cattolici.
After the deadliest attack on Jews in the United States, the Pope's words ring truer than ever. At the Vatican, Melissa Butts, Currents News. Back to you in New York, Liz.
Thank you, Melissa. A man accused of scrawling hate messages inside a Brooklyn synagogue is in custody tonight. 26-year-old James Pollard is being held in the psychiatric ward at Woodhull Hospital after being arrested on Friday. Police also think Pollard was responsible for small garbage fires set in and around synagogues in Williamsburg. A Hasidic newspaper in Brooklyn is facing backlash for not printing the photographs of the 3 women murdered at the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh last week. The publication's cover featured images of the 8 male victims, but the page 1 story contained only a small acknowledgement of the women who died, printed in significantly smaller print. Still to come on Currents News, an inspiration from the 8th grade, a Brooklyn Catholic student hard at work to help cancer patients, and a group of Catholic volunteers on a mission to help the missions. We'll be right back. Tonight, the story of a little girl devoted to helping others and what she does with hats to make sure cancer patients in treatment are taken care of. Currents News' Tim Harfman has that report.
Sky Workman is an 8th grader at St. Bernard Catholic Academy in Bergen Beach, Brooklyn, and she is dedicated to helping cancer patients losing their hair.
I basically collect fun and new hats to donate to children and now adults. And when I donate the hats to them, they're just happy afterwards.
From beanies to baseball caps, cartoon characters to sports teams, Sky has collected hundreds of hats and raised $1,000 to buy more. Everything's being donated to Cohen Children's Medical Center and Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Sky does this every year. She even has a foundation called Sky's the Limit. Her mother, Claudette, says it started when Sky was in 5th grade and learned about a St. Bernard graduate who lost the fight with cancer.
She came home and she was curious about cancer. And I explained, what the disease is and, the effects of it. And she said, I want to do something to help.
Then Sky's best friend experienced tragedy when her sister died from cancer.
Automatically, I was there for her because I understood what she was going through, because a couple years before that, my aunt had been diagnosed with breast cancer.
Cancer is all too common in the United States. The National Cancer Institute estimates 1 in 3 Americans will contract the disease at some point in their lives.
Thank you. Thank you.
The act of helping others is a foundation of the learning experience at St. Bernard Catholic Academy.
We try to follow what Jesus would do. Giving to the needy, helping the poor, helping the sick. So we try to do these fundraisers as often as we can.
It doesn't matter how young you are, you can still help others.
In Bergen Beach, Brooklyn, Tim Harfman, Currents News.
Oh, amazing young woman. Very proud of her. Determined volunteers rocked out in front of St. Joseph's Co-Cathedral over the weekend, and all for a good cause. The faithful of Prospect Heights put on a show for those willing to donate to the missions in Africa. But the performers didn't use musical instruments. Instead, they spent their Sunday in a row of rocking chairs to raise money for preschool children in Tanzania. Over $10,000 was raised. That is Currents News. I'm Liz Faublas, and just a reminder that Currents News is moving to a new time slot starting Monday, December 3rd. The news will air at 7 p.m. And as always, thank you for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.